So we're here in London with Judge Marilyn Mornington. You've had a very active career. In fact, you're actually a district judge in the United Kingdom, and which is quite a significant position, legal position, because you have a lot of judges under you. But before we just get into a conversation, I'd appreciate it. One, you've only recently converted to Islam, so maybe you could just tell us a little bit about that.
I've been specialising in crime against women, violence against women and child abuse now for some 10 to 12 years on a policy level for the United Kingdom. And I became, by no choice of my own, because of the work I was doing, closely involved with violence against women in the Muslim communities in this country. And in order to understand better where they were coming from, began to read about Islam, began to read the Quran, and to mix with Muslims. I would have to say I don't think I really ever had any choice in the matter, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had his eyes on me, and that was it. From that moment on, without any choice of mine, I kept on meeting one person after the other who led me down a path where there really was no turning back from, because the more I got to know about Islam, about the Prophet, peace be upon him, it became obvious to me that this is what I wanted, where I wanted to belong, and it was what I wanted to believe. And I always felt very comfortable with the family life and the stories of the wives of the Prophet and the companions, and it was just somewhere that over a period of time.
So in terms of, I mean, obviously you've dealt a lot with the Muslim issues, and I think we're all curious, you know, how bad is the situation, given that you've been involved in Muslim women's issues in particular. But what type of things have you come across just in your legal practice?
What we are seeing every day, both in my day-to-day practice and also on the committees that I'm having to deal with things, is our issues of forced marriage, where people just do not understand the difference between their cultural practices, particularly those of which we have almost 2 million in this country from the South Asian continent, that these practices are not Islamic, they are cultural, and part of my work is to point that out. Arising from forced marriage, we have honour-based violence, girls who are killed because they are trying to breach those cultural practices, either trying to run away from forced marriage or being within a forced marriage which has led to violence, trying to escape it. We have huge problems, one would have to say, in the United Kingdom of people being married to their first cousins against their wishes, tied in with the value of the British passport rather than anything else.
So bringing people from back home for...
Still, it's the first time we've ever had a wave of immigrants when 80% are still marrying from back home. That has very large socio-economic and educational difficulties, because the community here, because they're continuing to marry, mostly, if we're talking about the Pakistani community from Mirpur, which I have visited, which is a very particularly poor part of Pakistan, where the current rates of literacy are only 3% for women and 35% for men. So if you're continuing to bring in spouses with that lack of education, it has big impacts on the community here and their advancement, and they're continuing to fail in that. And I think if you look to why young men in particular are turning to crime and drugs, or perhaps to terrorism, I think a lot of it lies in the root there, and there are real difficulties.
Well, another thing that's interesting is you've actually gone, for the British government, you've gone to overseas. You've been to Pakistan, yes, and looked at women's issues there, and also now just recently, Saudi Arabia. How was that experience? Was that the first time you'd visited Muslim countries? And
yes, before I went to Pakistan, where I've been working for several years now, and I probably go about twice a year, I hadn't visited a Muslim country. I've also been recently to Turkey as part of my government work. And of course each experience is completely different, and the women in each of the countries, although they are all very strong and amazing women, are very different in their world that they live in. In Saudi Arabia, which I've just returned from a few weeks ago, a most amazing experience to see such highly educated, serene, beautiful women who fully contribute to Saudi Arabian life, both in terms of the businesses they run, the work they do in hospitals, and the amazing charitable work they do. Again, we're able to come back here and break down the preconceptions and hopefully move forward together. As a result of the trip, the British Foreign Office are looking to bring a delegation of Saudi women over here, particularly to look at advancing together issues over violence.
You were particularly looking at issues over violence in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, right. We looked at all aspects of women's life in Saudi Arabia, but my particular interest was looking at issues of how they're tackling and beginning to tackle issues of violence against women and children. I was very lucky to have a meeting with a Sharia judge. I think he was terrified meeting me. But,
really? That's an interesting experience.
He was very good to meet me and has kindly invited me to come back and actually see the courts in action.
That's wonderful.
But also I met doctors there, and they're setting up a nationwide network in Saudi Arabia of specialists, paediatricians and psychologists.
To report abuse.
Yes, so that there'll be special teams of doctors throughout Saudi Arabia who will identify themselves or have cases referred to them, will learn the specialist things that are needed by the courts, and are working in conjunction with the Sharia courts to start addressing these matters. And I can tell you that the Sharia judge I met put me in no doubt whatsoever of how seriously he and his brothers are intending to take this matter. I'm hoping in the future that they'll have female judges.
Yes,
so
we are. Yes, I think so.
Next year they're going to have the first female law students, so that's
right.
The start.
Well, as a judge, how were you perceived as a Muslim woman in the UK to maybe your colleagues and things like that when you first became a Muslim?
When was it really that you became Muslim?
Just before Ramadan last year. I don't at the present time make a big issue of it. I recall that one of the best Christians that I know is a High Court judge in England. He never talked about his Christianity, he just showed it by his way of life. And eventually you would say, what is it about Mark Headley that is so wonderful? And somebody, well, didn't you know he's a very active Christian? I'm not very wonderful, and I'm also very much a learner in Islam, so I think it's important that I keep a relatively low profile, carry on learning.
Because your responsibility, you have an entire district. How do you rate the domestic violence? Is there more domestic violence in the Muslim community, or is it consistent with the national average, or less?
We don't have statistics, but from all the work I've done, we have no reason to think that it's any greater within the Muslim community than within the dominant community. The difficulty is that there are certain barriers that women have, or men who are suffering this violence, to get over. Matters of racism against them, language difficulties, immigration issues, matters of izzat, of feeling that they're shaming their family if they come forward, lack of facilities for them. I mean, I was only talking yesterday to a very active Muslim woman in Wales, Shaheen Taj, of how we need to set up a nationwide group of Muslim female counsellors that women can go to, because if women feel that they go forward and the people that they'll speak to don't understand where they're coming from, they're not going to come forward.
And they also, I think, often assume because it's a Muslim woman, you know, she's oppressed because of her being a Muslim woman. People tend to not be able to see it as this is a human problem. They really begin, just because of the mere fact it's a Muslim woman, there's an automatic assumption that it's related to the religion, which is a real problem. We seem to have an inability to really see ourselves.
I didn't want to take my very smart hijab and abaya off when I came back from Saudi Arabia last week. I'd spent a lot of money on it. It was very nice.
Very smart, isn't it?
Very smart.
Some of them are beautiful,
with the sleeves.
Yes.
And also, partly because I didn't want to take it off, but secondly, as an experiment, I kept it all on going through Heathrow and Manchester Airport just to see what the reaction would be to me. And it only took minutes in Manchester Airport for a man to be very rude to me.
Really? What happened?
Which never happened before.
It's never happened before.
And people don't realize
Get out of the way, you said to me.
My wife, we were at a grocery store, and there was a Mexican girl was doing the thing, and the boy was up on the she had the baby up on thing because she was getting the things, and the girl said in Spanish to the other girl, just knock him over. And my wife just looked at her and she said, I speak Spanish, you know, because my wife's Mexican, but she had a hijab. She just assumed she was Arab, you know. And people have no, it's ignorance.
Do you know what fascinates me? Sheikh Hans and I both come from Roman Catholic backgrounds, and nuns the world over who wear identical clothes.
So the Kuwaiti women,
right?
They look like Kuwaiti women.
Right.
Because you know the Kuwaiti women wear the white and with the black over it.
Right.
And regardless of anybody's religion, people have this very...
Veneration.
Yeah, positive view of nuns. If they see nuns in an airport, they'll smile at them. Look, there's some nuns, isn't this nice, you know?
They feel more comfortable sometimes.
Psychologically, I want to know the difference.
Yeah.
Why are they not
The image, I think that's... Yeah. But how do you feel about that? Do you think this somehow will start changing this whole image? And
not at the present time.
No.
Because with the riot, with the Islamophobia, with the whole terrorist threat, and the communities aren't helping themselves either in that.
Yeah, this is the real problem.
Yeah, I dislike this word, Islamophobia, but you know, it's true.
Is that the case in the UK? Is there like a huge Islamophobia?
Huge. Huge.
It's growing on me.
Yes.
I didn't like the word before,
Really?
but I'm kind of getting used to it now.
I was interested to ask, I mean, you were talking about how you gradually started to learn about Islamic law and Islamic Sharia. I'm just wondering, how does that fit with your work? Because does that create some sort of conflict? Or?
The Sharia judge asked me this question.
Oh, really? Okay.
Very interesting. We had a delegation of our most senior judges out to Pakistan recently, because we've signed bilateral agreements with them about returning children and matters of this sort. And before they arrived, the Sharia judges in Pakistan read our Children's Act. And when they arrived, they said there is nothing in your law that contradicts anything in Sharia law.
Yeah.
There is no difficulties about that.
It's one of the things I think a lot of people don't realize. You know, people that have studied Western law and Islamic law, just so much of law is rooted in common sense. It's rooted in very rational principles. I mean, the majority of Islamic law. In fact, I think a lot of Western people, when they study Islamic marital laws, are actually shocked at how progressive a lot of the laws are. I mean, that's more...
You're smiling. That means you've studied it?
I have been studying it.
Yeah, I see the smile.
I've recently spoken to a female professor of Sharia law at Lahore University and a female professor of law, Professor Ali, at Warwick University here, who was Minister for Women's Development in Pakistan, but she's an English professor of law. They both told me within 3 weeks the same story, that when they lecture on Sharia family law, particularly the rights that women have, the demands they can make for their nikah contract, the male students all say, you're making this up.
No, they don't believe it.
This is the male Muslim students.
Yeah.
You're making this up. You're only saying this to please the girls.
Yeah.
Would you prefer to have somebody that decided to marry another woman as a husband? You decided to marry another woman, or would you rather have somebody that is just married to you but perhaps has extramarital affairs that you don't know about?
I'd rather someone was married to me and stayed with me and have no extramarital affairs.
Ooh, that is a hard question.
I've never thought about that.
No, never.
Well, you mean cheating or actually knowing about it? Well, if I found out that I was with somebody that was cheating, I just wouldn't be with them. And I think it's totally wrong. I can't see why they should have 4 wives. Why? You know, to me, marriage is like love and trust and, you know, all that.
What do you think about polygamy just in general?
I mean, as long as women are happy to be like in this kind of relations, I think it's fine. But if they kind of want just like one man, and then I think it's wrong. And I think if men can do that, that women can do that as well. So one woman can have like few guys. So I don't know.
Well, I wanted to ask you, when we were, talking about legal systems, we spoke about other countries that maybe didn't allow the woman to come forth for her rights because she was scared in some way that she may have other rights taken away from her.
Look at legal systems throughout the world, and really, it isn't a question of the laws you have.
Yes.
It's a question of whether men or women feel able to access those courts.
You know,
the courts
so
have to be.
yeah.
And when
I'm
the
really
judge
glad you
asked
said
me
that.
last week, when he said to me about the value of women judges, I said, you know, it's not when women are judges in a system. It's not the fact that you may appear before a women judge, but if there are women judges, women feel more comfortable with that system generally because they feel it's going to be more women-friendly if that's the case. But it may be a case in certain countries that women will only want to go to other women judges because they will feel comfortable with that.
Reconciliation, I mean, in conflict theory, it's the most difficult thing is getting the one side to see the other person's side and the other person to see the other. You have to be able to get outside of yourself, which is really a difficult thing to do.
Because that's a strong word, the shuh, you know.
Yeah, shuh is one yuqa shuha nafsi.
We've recognized, and going to law is the failure. If anybody gets to me,
that's it.
There's been a failure.
Yes.
And we've recognized
if anybody
this.
Gets to you, sorry,
if you actually have to get to me as a family law judge, you fail.
Yeah,
and I actually regard any case that actually fights in front of me as a failure, because at every stage, even if it gets to me as the court, I will do everything I can to get that couple to negotiate and to settle either on their own or with help from advisors. And we've now made this the central tenet of our whole family law system, whether it's about money or divorce or the children, that we do everything to help that couple and that family to at least come to an agreement, if they can't be reconciled as a family, to come to agreements about those issues. Now, I think what we very much need, while we're developing that, is that we need a system, certainly throughout the United Kingdom, that Muslim families have got somewhere safe and appropriate and neutral
and they can do that
they can go to, where so law should be the last resort.
It's surgery.
Yeah.
But
we don't have that, and I'm hoping
the Jewish community does have it.
They have a wonderful system.
Yeah.
I was going to ask
feel
you.
Full rights there. They feel safe to go there.
And they use their halakha law.
They use it for contracts. They use it any disputes.
Yeah, I mean that's the beauty of we have the same thing in the U.S. that you can actually set up.
Yeah.
They're like people's courts where people sign an agreement and then it becomes legally binding.
Yes.
They have to take the arbitrator's decision.
But throughout this country we have women who are trained lawyers, often because of hijab, are not working because they have difficulty getting into firms.
Oh, really?
Who could take part in this process.
Yeah.
Why aren't they working? Just discrimination?
And we've seen that. What's interesting is we've seen that in every country we've been to.
Yeah.
We've had women complain to us that they can't get jobs wearing the hijab. And I met a woman in one of the Arab countries. I could tell she was a devout woman just from her face. And so I was surprised she didn't have hijab on. And then as we were leaving, she said to me, "I'm really thinking about quitting this job." And I said, "Why?" And she says, "Because right when I get to the door, I take off my hijab. And when I finish my job, right when I get to the door, I put it back on because they won't allow me to wear the hijab. And you know, this is what I was trained in, and in this field in our country, you can't get a job wearing the hijab." And I was so distressed to hear that. You know, what humiliation to be in a Muslim country. I mean, it's one thing in the UK where people are just unaccustomed to this, but to be in a Muslim country where you can't wear a hijab.
I've gone through a real issue with girls who've said this to me. I mean, should I say to them? Because in England, once you had the job, they could never sack you. And in fact, once you had the job and you wore your hijab, people would get used to it within a week or so, and that would be the end of it. So therefore, should I advise these girls, highly qualified girls, who can't get jobs because of it, and they can never prove of that, because there are 200 applicants for every job anyway, take it off for the interview and put it back on next week when you've got the job. Now that's a real moral dilemma, because do we need those women in those positions, in those firms, and once they're there, and
that's called a nazila.
I was going to ask you, what is this?
That is a nazila.
I don't know what to say to
a nazila. I mean, that is a nazila, and that's where you would really need somebody like Sheikh Ali Juma or Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, somebody at that level that could really be able to take that. I mean, I wouldn't want the responsibility of saying, I could have an opinion, but I don't want the responsibility of...
We'll have to put you through to Sheikh Ali Juma. We met him in Egypt. He's wonderful, yeah. Again, Judge Marilyn, it's always wonderful to see you, and I'm really happy with, you know, I actually feel just very honored to have people like you coming into Islam and honoring the community. The Prophet ﷺ made a dua about Sayyidina Umar, Allahumma a'izz al-Islam bi ahad al-Umarain. You know, make Islam strong with one of the Umars.
and it was Umar ibn al-Khattab that Allah chose to answer that prayer. But it's one of the things that strengthens Islam. We're strengthened by Islam, but Islam is strengthened by strong people. So it's really good to have such a strong, like Bodhisattva. You know, we were going to do this by the statue of Bodhisattva, the great Celtic female warrior that fought the Romans. So, you know, may you be a Bodhisattva of Islam, inshallah.
Well,
and,
Sheikh Hamza, I owe so much to you, and I only hope as one of your students I can in any way, even 1%, repay what you have given to me.
Thank
you. It's been a
thank you
pleasure.
so much, really.